The president is worried right now, and here's why he should be worried. There are multiple investigations into his campaign and businesses, and they're growing, and they are starting to bear fruit. So far, there's been one outright conviction of his former campaign chairman for bank and tax fraud, with another trial looming. Even though these charges all date to before the campaign, the first conviction and the prospect of another could cause some serious problems for the president. In New York, there are currently two immunity deals in place, one for National Enquirer owner David Pecker, the keeper of the president's secrets, and the other his money man at the Trump Organization, Alan Weisselberg. Both are expected to be questioned about the president's involvement in his former personal attorney's criminal activity. The special counsel in the Southern District of New York prosecutors have secured 6 guilty pleas in the federal investigation into the president's campaign and business dealings. One of the pleas was the one that implicated the president. And the most staggering numbers, 32 people and entities have been indicted on more than 100 charges, including conspiracy against the United States. And this investigation is barely more than a year in, spelling trouble for anyone else trying to hide their involvement. And that trouble could get worse after the midterm elections if Democrats take the House of Representatives, when any talk of impeachment could become a real threat and subpoenas could begin flooding into the West Wing. But the Washington Post details the drain of legal resources from the Trump White House, now barely 24 lawyers, down from 35, and concerns over a dwindling and preoccupied communications staff, contrasting it to the Clinton White House during impeachment proceedings with 40 to 60, including a robust media team.
Maybe President Trump thinks he doesn't need a robust media team. It's all him. Joining us now, NBC News White House correspondent Jeff Bennett and former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance. All right, Jeff, to you first. Winter is coming. That is a very telling headline on the Washington Post piece. And the piece details this mass exodus from the White House legal team. And let's make it very clear. We are not talking about, the president loves to go after what he calls the biased media, attacking him. We're talking about mass exodus from the president's own White House legal team. What does that mean?
Yes, Steph. And look, publicly, White House officials say this kind of turnover is to be expected. These jobs are grueling. The hours are long. It's a high-stress job. But privately, I got to tell you, based on our own conversations with our own sources, our reporting mirrors that of the Washington Post, that there are people in the president's orbit who do fear that he lacks the necessary legal firepower to deal with the potential onslaught of inquiries, investigations, and subpoenas if, we have to underscore the word if, Democrats take the House come November. He's also, we understand, talked about the possibility of impeachment. That's what Rudy Giuliani, his outside attorney, tells us. But the president's is said to not be all that anxious about it and hasn't come up with a plan of action. But to take this out of the realm of the abstract and to give you a real-life example, as one person put it to me, say Democrats win come November, they take over the House, and they take over leadership of the relevant oversight committees. If they try to subpoena the president's tax records, if they subpoena White House emails having to do with the family separation policy at the border, well, the White House is going to need a fully staffed and experienced team, not just in the counsel's office, but also in the comms shop to deal with it. And right now, they're understaffed on both fronts, Steph and Allie.
All right, Joyce, this interview, the story in the Washington Post was based on 26 separate conversations, 26 separate sources who said that the White House advisors, people close to the president, his aides, those who remain left, are really concerned that if the House flips in November, there's this laundry list that we've been showing on TV, a memo that Republicans have sent out about all the things that Democrats might do, investigations they may launch. But there are some real issues at the top of that, subpoenas and possible impeachment proceedings, and that the White House simply isn't strategically prepared for this.
It was great that the Republicans went ahead and documented the full extent of the swamp so that Democrats won't have to do that on their own if they retake the House. There are some major concerns that are evidenced in that list. And the problem is that each of these legal inquiries is not something that's as simple as responding to a subpoena. It requires a team of lawyers inside of the White House counsel's office to evaluate whether it asks for material that the White House should turn over in the interests of transparency, or whether it should legitimately be protected by executive privilege, because the White House counsel's office is the lawyer for the presidency, not the president. So they have to think about this administration, this tenure in office, but what any action that they might take or documents that they turn over might mean for the legacy of future presidents. It's not a cut and dry legal inquiry. It's not easy. They need to be fully staffed up with very high quality lawyers. Instead, they've lost 3 of the White House counsel's deputies. A 4th one will leave tomorrow. It's a very difficult situation given what could be down the road.
Okay, but Joyce, don't we even not need to get down the road? If you're a White House lawyer now and you've got a president who has continuous outbursts, especially this morning on social media, the president lies and he lies again and again. If you're the president, if you are a White House attorney and you want to live beyond this administration, you want to get a job, you want to keep your reputation, isn't it wise to simply say, does this work for me? The president is operating on his own agenda. And if you look at his career history, many, many business people around him have blown up, figuratively.
I think that that's the problem, right? Many people have left this counsel's office, and now that there are many open slots, people are unwilling to take the job. So the president still has the deputy in the counsel's office who deals with national security issues, but all of the others are missing. And the challenge will be to find people who are willing to come in. If you come into the White House counsel's office at this point, you have to engage in a really pragmatic calculus of whether you might not end up a subject of the investigation, whether you might not have to spend a lot of your personal money to hire a lawyer to represent you. And it becomes a less appealing job for the caliber of folks that the president needs to attract right now.
Yeah, and that's interesting because allies tell the Washington Post in that story that the president is wondering why he doesn't have lawyers like the ones representing Jared Kushner or Don McGahn, because everybody in the White House has a lawyer these days. But, you know, Stephanie, you and I have talked about the fact that it's the White House. You're always going to find somebody who wants to work there. But, Joyce, last night I was talking to Richard Painter, who says, if you're a lawyer who goes to work for this White House, you could actually face real problems later in life, as Stephanie suggested, in terms of hiring. But more than that, some of these people might get themselves implicated into wrongdoing.
No lawyer wants to end up getting a subpoena either to appear and testify on the Hill or in front of the special counsel. And you run that risk, not because you're a bad person or a bad lawyer, but simply because you have proximity to events that might come within the terrain prosecutors are looking at. So that is a problem. There is news this morning that the president has expressed that he's interested in hiring Abbe Lowell, a well-known criminal defense lawyer who works vigorously on behalf of his clients with great success. But he already represents Jared Kushner, and it seems like representing the president in addition would be something of a conflict of interest. The president's going to have to find and reach out and attract a high caliber of talent willing to serve in this White House, and that's a challenge.
Okay, Jeff, take us inside the White House. While all of this is happening, the president is saying, this is just the media going after me. The White House is being run like a smoothly run machine. All 3 of us know from our contacts inside the White House who,
that's not really
oddly
true.
enough, don't seem to want to return my call today because they don't want to talk about this tweet. Are your contacts actually responding to this with a straight face? The only smooth running machine similar to what Trump is talking about is maybe Tesla right now.
And Steph,
You like that, right?
Good. Yeah. Good one. Yeah, I mean, look. People in the know say that top-flight white shoe attorneys are not beating down the door of this White House, flooding the West Wing with resumes, trying to represent the White House or the president for all of the reasons that Joyce Vance points out. They also know that the president has a reputation for not listening to his lawyers. That's what accounts for the first shakeup of the president's outside legal team. Add to that what the president said today on Twitter about Don McGahn, suggesting that Don McGahn was ousted. In a tweet, he said, regarding my decision on Mr. McGahn. I had to check in with the White House official who says no, what the president was actually referring to was accepting the terms of McGahn's departure, which, by the way, had been an open secret for weeks, if not months, that he was planning to leave the White House sometime in the fall after the Senate hearings for Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. So we have it confirmed again that McGahn was not fired, was not ousted, that he is leaving on his own volition.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.